Today I'll be talking about what happens when we take a mobile-first approach to clinical trials and a radical impact I believe this will have on the clinical trial industry. For this slide deck and a copy of the video of this talk, find us on Twitter at mhealth. Now, when I first started talking about mHealth, it was back in a time when speakers would remind audiences to turn off their mobile phones. Thankfully, those days are long consigned now to the history books, and I'm fortunate to now be talking to audiences who all at least have one smartphone in their pocket and they all know how to use it. But my experiences with telecoms in healthcare actually go all the way back to my first memories in life, when I noticed as a toddler on a visit to hospital that the doctors made a jangling sound because they carried coins in the deep pockets of their white lab coats. It was seeing the doctors digging out these coins and generously handing them to the parents of sick children so that they could go and use the payphone in the hotel lobby to make telephone call home that my young eyes identified with the opportunity that we have to utilize telecoms to provide care. Even back then though, I realized that there was a huge gap between the potential for telecoms to be used and how the healthcare industry was using it. For example, the payphones in that hospital were located all the way down in the lobby, instead of being located on the side of each bed, where they could better connect patients, their loved ones and carers. Skip forward 15 years, and I'm enrolled at UCL Medical School in London, and I'm the only person there with a mobile phone in my pocket. Now, this was at a time when a mobile phone cost the price of a good second-hand car, and people were so unfamiliar with small mobile phones like this one that their use that they just really would ask me what it was that I was carrying. Fortunately, the designers had clearly anticipated this problem, because if you look closely, you'll see that when the earpiece was flipped up a little bit, the words cellular telephone were actually printed there. I remember this being helpful because until I explained that this was a cellular telephone, a lot of people would have just assumed that it was a cordless landline phone that I'd absent-mindedly taken out of the home, where it obviously would no longer work. In 2006, together with some very smart doctors, I launched a service called 3G Doctor that lets anyone use their 3G mobile to conduct documented video consultations with our registered doctors. The service has been made available 24/7 for 8 years now. The service costs £35 per consult, and there are no other fees or charges, so you don't have to have private insurance to avail of this, nor do you need to worry about things like monthly subscriptions, making payments when you're not using the service, etc. etc. To use the service, you simply visit our secure website, log in with your mobile phone number, top up using any of these popular forms of electronic payment. You can also create a PHR or share a PHR that you already use. Patients are then provided with the opportunity to share their concerns with the help of an interactive medical history taking questionnaire. This is a technology that was developed by Primetime Medical that we have licensed, and it has been developed over a 20-year period and has been clinically validated at the Mayo Clinic by John Buckman, Professor of Primary Care. Following the completion of the interactive questionnaire, patients are then provided with an opportunity to share any additional information. So you're probably already getting the idea that this is nothing like your normal GP consult. This is a service that has been designed from the ground up to help patients talk about their data and the information they already have access to. Patients can consult with us about things they might find it difficult to take to their normal doctor. For example, the data being captured on their Apple Watch, concerns they might have about information they've read online, or that might be influencing their decision not to follow advice or to take medications that have already been prescribed by their family doctor. You could probably begin to imagine for yourself the wide range of topics patients consult with us about. Everything from concerns about treatment options to patient community group discussions about vaccinations to online content like YouTube videos. The only real limits are your imagination. Out of interest, has anybody here provided a YouTube video to their doctor? Wow. So YouTube is now 10 years old, has 1 billion users, and grows 50% year on year. Hundreds of hours of video are being uploaded every minute, and no one in this room has ever shared such content with a doctor. Has anybody been given a link to a YouTube video by a doctor or a nurse? Wow, what a world of opportunity we live in. Importantly, the process that we've designed also provides our doctors with the opportunity to read and review patient information that they're sharing so that they can conduct their own research and get prepared before they meet with their patient. So it's no longer a case of the door swinging open and you stepping into the spotlight to pour out your soul, hopeful that you won't forget to mention something important. With 3G Doctor, this important information exchange happens long before you ever have to take any time off work, endure a waiting room, or walk into a consultation room. The video consultation itself normally lasts around 10 minutes. And after the consultation, patients can log in and view their comprehensive consultation report. Now, because patients have been given the tools to document their concerns in detail, this report is incredibly valuable in helping patients frame and understand their health concerns, and it greatly aids any further encounters the patient may have. For example, you can easily print this off and share it with your pharmacist, doctor, or practice nurse, who will find it greatly helps them to appreciate your needs and work more productively with you. So the focus for 3G Doctor is to ensure that the next move you make is the right one. And we've been greatly aided in doing this because a long time ago we implemented a process to gather feedback from patients. It's incredibly simple to ask patients, how do you think we could improve our service? But it's turned out to be a source of brilliant ideas. We no longer try to develop 3G Doctor with a crystal ball or with our imaginations. Instead, we're listening to actual patients telling us what they think was good and what they think we need to improve upon. So as a key takeaway from this talk, you must understand that 3G Doctor is not trying to be a replacement for your family doctor. That is the best place for you to get the care that you need. But outside of that relationship, there are lots of opportunities where we can help patients and carers. And good examples might be to discuss some healthcare content you've discovered online or to find help as a carer. For example, you can discuss with us your mother's breast cancer, your mother-in-law's Alzheimer's, things that often have got a huge bearing on your life and that of your loved ones, but you can't always find it easy to talk to a doctor about because they're all so important patient privacy issues when that doctor's primary responsibility lies with their patient and not their carers. It's also important to appreciate that we've decided not to sell prescriptions, and we've found this adds lots of value because it really does mean that the patient is our one and only customer. We're also not involved in selling your information. And this is very important because we make all of our money from providing you with documented consults. It just keeps us sharply focused just on providing this to the best of our abilities. Now, we pride ourselves on the fact that our doctors are impartial and independent, so they have also nothing else to sell you but for their attention and advice. A key thing we've come to realise about the clinical trial market is that it's being driven to evolve very quickly into an industry that is focused on customer service, and the standards for this are now being set by major online brands like Amazon. Has anyone here tried or heard about the Amazon Kindle Fire's Mayday button? This is a simple service that promises you 24/7 live video technical support with response times of no more than 15 seconds. Can anyone here begin to start imagining if healthcare professionals one day are as accessible as that? Well, we hope to lead this evolution, and you can connect with me and learn more about how our service, 3G Doctor, can add value to the lives of the patients who are participating in your clinical trials and the insights we can help you take from being more committed to helping patients share and find solutions to their needs. So, I take it we've all seen the movie Sixth Sense. Has anyone shared it with a doctor? Okay, so it's about this little boy who can see things the rest of us can't. Well, I sometimes feel I'm a bit like that when it comes to clinical trials. because of some very early experiences I had in my life. Here's a picture of me back in 1986, and I'm typing up a clinical trial on my new computer. The trial involved this very cumbersome medical device. It was also very expensive, and my older brother had been loaned it and had been using it to analyse the ECGs of racing greyhounds. The title of his paper was the predictive value of ECG on a racing greyhound, which basically meant, could you use the ECG recorded prior to a race to predict which dog would make it out of the traps and around the track first? Now, I hope everyone here is supporting calls for all trials to be published, because there's a huge bias being introduced because trials that didn't appear to work aren't being published. But I think it's important that we go further than this and we work towards documenting all consults as well as all trials. The need for this has been really obvious to me because I realised that in top flight sport medicine, they don't even publish the trials that do work because they see those outcomes as a competitive advantage. Now, I do have to apologise obviously for the very gratuitous use of this image after last weekend's Irish rugby celebrations here in Edinburgh. But we really do all need to appreciate that these triumphs in sport today are coming directly through the use of data science. So you can all hopefully see that there's a wearable sensor stitched into the back of the Irish player's green jersey. Now, if you think back to that research I told you about that I helped publish in 1986, it should become clear. Big, expensive medical devices are now cheap, wearable, easy to use, and they're creating new opportunities to use data science to help patients and improve our understandings of medicine. Now, has everyone here got or at least tried an alive core ECG? Okay, I hope so, because it will really help you understand that data science that was required in 1985 for us to try and predict from ECGs which athlete should win a race. It should also be easy to appreciate that today in 2015, we now have a much greater ability to predict really important things, like the predictive value of ECG on readmission of a cardiac patient being discharged from hospital. To give you some idea of how far mHealth is taking us, the technology inside the ECG machine that I showed you before, which together with the leads and the power cables fitted in, just completely filled the rear of an estate car. Well, that all now fits into the little pocket on my jeans. You know, the one that Steve Jobs told us was there to hold the iPod Nano? Well, you can now put an ECG machine in there. What's more, as you can see in this video I made with my Google Glass, this tech is now so well put together that it can be adapted to work continuously on a patient using a water treadmill. Something that was completely unthinkable before now, with all those rolls of paper spools and all those mains powered cables. And to think, it's now in a £50 sensor that works with the smartphone that you already have in your pocket. Now, a big positive is that today that can also be provided, that no matter what people say, although you can supplement care with these devices, they will never be able to provide care themselves. Care comes when a carer you trust looks you in the eye and you have a human connection. And the big positive is that today, even that can be now provided through a video mobile phone. Now, just out of interest, has anyone here asked for directions in Ireland? Well, I'll share a funny phrase that locals like to try on tourists. Well, you wouldn't really want to start from here. It's supposed to imply that they know you've really gone and got yourself lost. Now, I think that's really the big challenge for the clinical trial industry today in 2015. You wouldn't really start from where the clinical trial industry is today if you wanted to further understanding of health and bring more powerful new drugs to market. I think it's time for the clinical trial industry to take a mobile-first approach, just like that's being taken by companies like Apple with their disruptive new research kit. I think this will work best with examples, so look here at how the clinical trial industry currently does recruitment. It's a little bit embarrassing to think that in 2015, my former medical school, one of the best medical schools in the world, has somehow employed someone who thinks that they need to resort to advertising in the classifieds at the back of those free junk newspapers that litter the floors and seats of London Underground trains. This is how they're actively trying to recruit today for a trial of a new blood pressure monitoring watch. If this is how one of the world's top centres of medical excellence is trying to recruit, is it any wonder that we heard earlier how some 12% of clinical trials don't even ever get started because they can't even recruit a single patient? Now compare that cheap-looking device with the shift that Apple is leading with its new watch. In a fortnight, there will be a queue of people lining up to buy their own health-sensing Apple Watch. Imagine the opportunity for these patients to share their data with researchers. Yes, it's very expensive. It's a luxury item that will probably be purchased primarily for its role as a piece of jewelry. But can you see how it's flipping the model of patient recruitment by designing something that patients actually want to use and have? Another important thing to notice is there is no real reason for bricks and mortar to have a role in clinical trials. Yet today, 98% of all clinical trial data transactions are still taking place within the four walls of research centres. Now, I'm not going to say anything more about this because we've all sat through 2 days of sessions highlighting with great examples the lack of outcomes being achieved with our current approach to clinical trials. In the sporting world, it's easy to see that things have moved on. The Olympic athletes regularly set new records, and increasingly these advances are being enabled by the talents of data scientists. This is a video, however, that I believe everyone in the clinical trial industry must watch. Laurie Breckland, seen here talking at Medicine X conference at Stanford, died recently from breast cancer and was a journalist who understood the data science opportunity. And it left her asking the world to promise to never give a dollar in her name to breast cancer awareness. Now, this is counter, obviously, to practically everything everyone is saying in the media, but it's a message that's being said by someone who understands how data is being shared in other industries and has realized that the healthcare industry is negligent because it fails to utilize the sacred data that patients share with their carers and want to be used to help others. The focus of the clinical trial industry today is simply not on patients. The industry can host a patient-centric conference every other week, but the reality is most clinical trials aren't even being branded by the big pharma companies that are paying for them. So why is patient focus going to make a big difference? Well, look at Uber. This is the world's biggest transportation service and it owns no cars. Airbnb, the world's biggest provider of accommodation, has no properties of its own. Alibaba, the world's biggest retailer, has no inventory on its shelves. Okay, you should have got the hang of this by now, but it's still hard to digest for those who are working in industries that are being disrupted because the new looks so radically different. Who would have imagined that a dating site at Harvard could grow into becoming the world's biggest media company without ever buying a camera or hiring a single journalist? So my prediction for the clinical trial industry is that companies like Apple, with their research kit, who take a mobile-first approach, will become the biggest clinical trial companies without ever entering into the business of making drugs. Now, I don't expect this transition to be proven. I'm already seeing some signs of this. Because, for example, in 2008, I started an mHealth group on LinkedIn to network, discuss, and debate mHealth innovations as they happen. And already my thoughts on how mobile will transform clinical trials that I'm sharing with you today have been completely ridiculed by professionals who are on there who have led long careers in the clinical trial industry. Fortunately, I'm not completely alone in my enthusiasm for Apple's entry into the clinical research industry. Here's Dr. Eric Topol, a researcher, cardiologist, and author of The Patient Can See You Now. He's also talked about the enormous scale of the opportunity that he sees opening up with Apple's entrance to the clinical trial industry. But early signs are already to be found. For example, compare Cleveland Clinic's clinical trial here. This is a recruitment ad targeting patients with smartphones. and then compare that with that printed in that free throwaway paper trying to advertise people to get involved with a blood pressure watch. But the most compelling piece of evidence that I've got that Apple, the world's biggest company with a $170 billion war chest, is going to disrupt the clinical trial industry. Here's where I see that. It's in the complete silence from the clinical trial industry. No major pharma brand has made a single comment or press release about this development. Yes, of course, they're having crisis meetings behind closed doors. I've been invited to present at a few of these myself, but I've noticed no one really understands what role Apple's going to play. So here's my ideas on how ResearchKit will lead to a complete redesign of the clinical trial industry. Fortunately, it's not complex. It's actually very, very easy to understand, because when you boil down what is being done in clinical trials, it's all about asking questions and documenting answers. So at 3G Doctor, I've explained how since 2006, we've been doing a lot of that with our interactive medical history taking questionnaires. And this can be developed on with the addition of a natural language interface, like that offered by Nuance that you've all seen in Apple's Siri product. Now, the incredible thing that should be clear is that today a mobile phone can have the medical history taking skills of the world's best doctors. But in the clinical research industry language, this means a trial participant with a mobile phone can do most of what today is being done within a clinical trial research facility. The mobile phone has transformed our ability to capture data, and it's enabling clinical trial designers to do more with less. In the future, clinical trials will be designed more like marriages than one-night stands. What I think we'll all realise very soon is that ratings are going to be the biggest driver of innovation in the clinical trial industry, because ratings will reward those who are more ethical, scientific and transparent. Looking around at clinical trials and you'll see ones that don't even have websites. Clearly that's not something that's going to be rewarded by patients who are rating their clinical experience. Ratings will provide the opportunity for patients to tell really powerful stories around clinical trials and the companies that are designing, running and paying for them. Done right, it's going to become the biggest marketing tool, encouraging patients to participate in trials and for healthcare workers to advocate clinical trials to their patients. The reality is that we will no longer be able to get away with outdated paper-based processes. This industry will have to at least appear to be doing things efficiently. Ratings will also reward those companies that actually give back to patients and help them gain insights from the data they've collected during and after a clinical trial. It's no longer going to be enough to say, here, have a USB stick and, good luck. No, this will have to evolve into giving patients access to a healthcare professional who could spend some time giving them attention and helping them understand the data and the implications it has for their lives. At the moment, the whole way we are managing the risks of clinical trials makes no sense. Where ratings will take us to is a place where everyone's eyes get to see the data. Ratings will demand the clinical trial industry evolves to become customer focused, always on, always available. Just like that Amazon Mayday model I mentioned before. We can never be closed. Part of the deal is that we have to always be available. Ratings will also ensure that we'll all be working to ensure the care of clinical trial participants is coordinated. I've explained how challenging it is for patients to discuss online content with their doctors, but a clinical trial participant faces much greater challenges today because often their primary care doctor is not even in the loop. One of the things I demonstrate to healthcare workers as part of an mHealth training course I developed is how Google hires the world's top developer talent from universities using Hangout video calls, because it provides a glimpse into how patients, carers and clinical trial data can benefit from seamless video connectivity. Essentially, this product was developed to fix a challenge Google faced to hire in an incredibly competitive market where competitors were offering immediate hiring decisions. First, They process candidate CVs using data science. So if you want a job at Google, the secret is copy the CV of someone who performed really well once they started at Google. But be careful, because they also have data science tools to pick up on plagiarism. So they'll also be able to see where you've copied stuff from. Now the really cool thing is, what they then do is that they then bring the candidate into a Google Hangout video session, and they'll have the manager of the new recruit in another continent asking them to fix some code in real time. With an asynchronous process, they eventually make the decision involving all parties, and if the candidate is to be given the post, all involved in that decision will get together via a Hangout to welcome their new colleague. The emotionally charged nature of this remote encounter is fascinating. It's actually normal for the new candidate to be overwhelmed with tears of joy. Now, I think this provides incredible insights into how clinical trials should be designed to facilitate better communication with the patient's existing carers and the clinical trial team. Why aren't clinical trial participants joined at their GP consults by their clinical trial researchers via FaceTime so they can collapse the barriers of time, distance, and all work more productively together? Ratings are going to require us to listen, which is a little cardinal sin of the healthcare industry, where we don't listen to patients because time is made so scarce. Recently at South by Southwest, I think Malcolm Gladwell summed the problem up brilliantly when he said, with all this drive for efficiency, we've managed to get rid of the one thing that patients want, the attention of their doctor. Today we've got the doctors henpecking away all day at computers to enter data that we can let patients and carers share with us themselves. If the aviation industry, for example, was at the same stage in IT integration as the clinical trial industry, Ryanair would have their pilots working overtime, entering your seat and beverage choices into their IT system. It's also important to realise that listening to a patient doesn't always require us to be sitting next to a patient. In many occasions, patients are more honest when sharing their information via the screen of their trusted mobile phone. I also think it's key for the clinical trial industry to hire some really young people. The born mobile generation, as they're becoming known, don't think at all like us. Of course, we can explain and justify the intricacies of what we do and why we do certain things in clinical trials, but the reality is, if it can't be explained to the born mobile generation, you have a major problem. So please take the time to watch this video in which young children are given a Walkman and asked to explain it. Initially, you see them completely baffled. Their suggestions for what this device is range from it being a boombox, which I have to admit I had to look up. Okay, so for those of you, a boombox is one of those Bluetooth speakers that you pair with your mobile phone. Okay, so they then gave them the big foam headphones and showed them how it all wired up and the batteries, etc. were inserted. Finally, they gave them a cassette. At this point, you just see these children completely bamboozled by the way tracks are being selected by rewinding, fast forwarding. They'd only ever seen channel selectors on iPods, MP3 players, DVD players, so to explain to them how tape was being dragged over a surface between two spools was just, in their minds, completely ridiculous and antiquated. Now, these same open minds can give us great insights into the failures of clinical trial design. Show a kid a glucometer, for example, and wait till you see the bemusement. A few years ago, a child presented in the clinic, and a doctor colleague of mine noticed that the child was obsessed with her use of a pen on the prescription pad. It turned out that this was the first time that child had ever seen a pen being used. Yes, in 2015, toddlers are bemused and laughing at the antiquated ways that fully qualified medical professionals are working. The glucometer is the perfect example of how wrong we're getting things. Can you all see this device is just vomiting data out at the patient, when what they need are human insights, advice, suggestions that are actionable? Take a walk, eat an apple. Not 106 milligrams per DL, or whatever that's supposed to mean. Check out how a company called Telcare has started turning things around with services that are built around the world's first mobile embedded glucometer. Using efficient, smart devices like this that can enable data science insights to be applied will be compulsory if you hope to have your clinical trials rated positively. Getting rated is going to be the focus of the clinical trial industry for the next 10 years and will have great implications on how we capture medical sensor data. Why don't we give carers real-time access to the data being captured by the medical devices that patients are of their patients? Why should there be paperwork involved in documenting from an electronic device to the cloud? There should be no need to explain to you the value for the clinical trial industry of uncorrupted, time, location stamped data being automatically submitted into patients' records in real time. With tens of thousands of diabetics today already using Telcare devices, and in twinning of these with top-rated apps for diabetics, it's no wonder that Telcare is one of the most disruptive mHealth technology companies in the world, and the potential for the clinical trial industry to extend this beyond glucose monitoring is completely untapped. Mobile phone-based sleep monitoring services are also going to add lots of value, and this is an area you need to be working on. Philip Kahn, CEO, founder of Full Power, who happens to also be the inventor of the camera phone, the inventor of the world's best-selling mobile health app, the inventor of the best-selling wearables in the market today. He has identified sleep and calls it the low-hanging mHealth sensor opportunity. It's an area that is completely exploding. Top-flight athletes are already all over this. When ratings are involved, it will be clear that clinical trials need to expand beyond the trial, and the rich quality content is going to be really key to this. As I checked out of my hotel this morning, my relationship with the hotel absolutely didn't end. It was actually just getting started, because every hotel in 2015 knows that if I go onto TripAdvisor and post a positive rating about the delightful experience I enjoyed at Edinburgh's Caledonian Hotel, they will be able to convert that into more bookings, higher occupancy levels, and more hard, cold cash. Great lessons can come from how Apple prioritized the experience beyond the sale of their devices with software updates, support for accessories, and enabling an environment for app developers so that they can enrich their experience that their customers are enjoying. One quite crazy outcome of ratings will be how they make it sensible to crowdfund clinical trials. This is because not only is the technology now low cost and distributed enough, but documentation of care means patients can be engaged enough to actively participate. Now, this is all going to be very challenging for the clinical trial industry. One major concern will arise because patients who are participating on very expensive clinical trials will for the first time be able to export their data to be used in someone else's clinical trial. While one company might face costs of $250,000 per patient in an oncology trial, for example, the same patient in that trial might want to give away all their data through ResearchKit to another clinical trial organizer that they trust. Have no doubt that the future of pharma will be defined by the companies that work out how to tell the key stories and establish trust with patients and their data. I also think crowdfunding is going to be a great way to focus R&D. The UK's antibiotic industry, for example, no longer exists. Not because we don't all think it's very important that we have new antibiotics, but because of the commercial realities. Only time will tell if patients disabled by and carers who have lost loved ones to infectious diseases will be best placed to tell the stories required to fund new antibiotics. But I have a feeling that this is where the future funding will stem from. How will cures for rare diseases ever attract the R&D commitments of pharma companies? I think we're going to see more patients giving up their day jobs and inspiring others to support them as they search for cures with transparent, openly shared research efforts. As with most things, there will always be those who need just to get the business model and understand how money will be made before they can even begin to get interested. For those, I'd remind them about the story I shared about asking directions when lost in Ireland. But you don't really want to start from here. If retail still relied on paper-based documentation, and retailers like Tesco didn't have their club card, would you recommend a retailer like Tesco create a mobile first version of this? Or would you recommend that they go for the short term, cheap alternative and stand enough people with clipboards at the exits of all their stores to ask the customers as they left to tell them what they bought? It might seem very expensive to take a mobile first approach, but in 2015, the alternative is you'll let companies from outside your industry build this new data science model, and it will make your existing businesses obsolete. If you want to see the power of data science, look to how Tesco pioneered the sale of mobile phones to senior citizens in Europe. Using their club card data sets, they identified carers who bought shopping for their elderly relatives. And then they pitched them the opportunity to move to Tesco Mobile with the benefit of bespoke offers and free calls between them and the people they cared for. This now seems such an obvious way to reach seniors because they obviously weren't visiting mobile phone shops to get sold on the latest devices by spotty little boys. What's interesting is that even the mobile phone companies with all their data sets didn't realize how they could expand their own market. To untap this untapped billion-dollar opportunity for new mobile subscribers, it required a retailer with data science expertise. It should be obvious that Apple's advertising is primarily targeted at mothers. It's because they've realized that they get the handset choice of children. They choose the handsets for elderly parents and husbands. It's now no longer being made by the individuals that the male engineer-dominated mobile industry had been categorically ignoring, or obviously just tried to serve with pink phones for way too long. Now, the really, really good news about all of this is that it gets really simple once you realize that mobile first clinical trials will be all about ratings. Because as a clinical trial participant, there's not much difference between me positively rating a clinical trial or me rating the care that I received while participating in a clinical trial. I really recommend you watch this talk by Dr. Bridget Duffy. The former patient experience officer at Cleveland Clinic explains this mother test here. And you only pass this if you can trust and have confidence in your service to such an extent that you would feel completely comfortable letting your mother use it unassisted. Has anybody here asked themselves, would they put their own mother in a trial that they designed? Mobile first clinical trials might also help us to bring new drugs to market quicker, because we will have developed tools to monitor their effectiveness and safety once they've passed safety requirements and once they're being prescribed by doctors in market. We might just find that we've already invented all the drugs we need, and through data science we just needed to learn how to drill down into the data that we can capture so that we can learn how and when to use them best. So do you remember the moment when Inspector Columbo asks the suspected murderer one last question as he leaves? You know, that interruptive question that begins with "my wife," where he really heightens the personal human connection with the suspect whose story he's trying to unravel. Well, I've seen something similar to that happening in doctor consult rooms, where a patient is about to leave the office and turns back around and asks, "What would you do if it was your leg?" Or, "What would you do if it was your mother that had this issue?" I think some very interesting dynamics are at play in that moment, because there you see the patient making it clear that above and beyond the trust of the hospital clinic and all those posh framed medical certificates on the wall, they personally place most value hearing a human say to them, "Yes, this is exactly what I would do if it was a decision being made about me." Now imagine we extend this to clinical trials and project ourselves into the position of patients. We're going to create experiences that patients will want, and I believe this is going to really help address some of the big, intractable problems we have with patient adherence to their prescribed medications. Martin Luther King told us that the most persistent and urgent question we all have is what we're doing for others. Patients today with long-term conditions rarely see their treatment helping anyone else but themselves. And an incredible thing happens when we document care and allow the data to be used responsibly by clinical researchers. By participating in mobile-first clinical trials and sharing your data, not only will you benefit from being able to see the longitudinal benefits of behavioral choices that you're making, but you will also know that other patients who will come after you will get better care because of the sacrifices that you made and the understandings that they have enabled medical science to generate. By bringing ratings to clinical trials, we are going to make being a patient in a clinical trial a productive experience. So you can easily find me. I don't use business cards, as I really do try my best to discourage everyone from using paper. But I hope to hear from you all, as I'd like to help you on the road that you need to take to make your clinical trials mobile first. Thank you to the organisers of the Mobile Clinical Trial Congress and for your generous support to have me attend today, and I look forward to talking again at your next event.